In American professional sports, disappointment is the most common currency amongst fans. Such are the stakes when 30-plus teams are competing for a prize that only one can win. We rightfully celebrate the champions that overcome these odds, but in their stead, there's always a group of teams that were on the precipice, ending their seasons someplace between disappointment and devastation. We often assume when a team gets close that their time will eventually come, but history is filled with tragic examples where that final triumph never happens. Today I'll be highlighting these tragically successful teams, franchises that went through periods of sustained success, in some cases coming within inches of a championship, only for glory to slip through their fingertips. You could call these teams the best to never do it, the footnotes to a larger hero's journey. We begin with the Oklahoma City Thunder of the 2010s, a team that at one point featured 3 future MVPs in Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. When the young Thunder broke through to reach the 2012 NBA Finals, with each of their 3 best players under the age of 24, it seemed inevitable that they'd one day win a title. But if there's one lesson here, it's that you can't predict when a championship window will close. Months after the Finals loss to the Miami Heat, OKC traded Harden to the Rockets, where he transformed into an MVP-caliber superstar for the remainder of the decade. The Thunder remained in contention as Durant and Westbrook blossomed into all-NBA players, but their subsequent seasons were full of heartbreak. Russell Westbrook's devastating knee injury in the 2013 playoffs derailed the top-seeded Thunder's title chances, Kevin Durant's foot injury threw the 2015 season off course, and they lost grueling conference finals to San Antonio in 2014 and Golden State in 2016. The latter after blowing a 3-1 lead to a 73-win Warriors team, a collapse that altered NBA history. Then came the final gut punch, Durant joining those same Warriors, where he would win back-to-back titles and finals MVPs, while Thunder fans were left wondering what could have been. After earning the Broad Street Bullies nickname for their aggressive and intimidating style of play, and winning back-to-back Stanley Cups in the 1970s, the Philadelphia Flyers began transitioning to a new era in the 1980s. Captain and franchise legend Bobby Clarke retired in 1984, paving the way for young stars like Mark Howe, Brian Propp, and Tim Kerr to lead the team. The transition bore fruit right away. The Flyers reached the 1985 Stanley Cup Finals, but fell to Wayne Gretzky's Edmonton Oilers in 5 games. Flyers goalie Pelle Lindbergh won the Vezina Trophy as the league's best goaltender, signaling a bright future for the team. But tragedy struck when Lindbergh died in a car accident the following season. And while the resilient Flyers had another strong year, they fell in the first round of the playoffs. In 1987, Ron Hextall emerged as the new franchise goaltender, winning the Vezina Trophy and leading the Flyers to a rematch against the Oilers in the Stanley Cup Final. This time they pushed Edmonton in an epic 7-game series, but fell short yet again. Despite the loss, Hextall's performance in goal earned him the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. The Flyers made one more playoff push in 1989, reaching the conference finals, but never reached the same heights during this era again. To this day, the franchise is still seeking its first Stanley Cup since 1975. The San Francisco 49ers are far from a cursed franchise, winning 5 Super Bowl titles in the 1980s and 90s, but their recent run under head coach and offensive wonderkind Kyle Shanahan has been snake-bitten to say the least. In a 5-year span, the 49ers reached 4 NFC Championship games and 2 Super Bowls, but each playoff run has ended in a new form of sorrow. In their first Super Bowl appearance in 2019, they led the Chiefs 20-10 late in the fourth quarter, only for Patrick Mahomes to orchestrate 3 touchdown drives in the final 6 minutes to steal the championship. In 2021, they lost the NFC Championship game to their division rival Los Angeles Rams, who then went on to win the Super Bowl. And in 2023, they lost another gut-wrenching Super Bowl to the Chiefs, this time in overtime on a walk-off touchdown. And beyond these agonizing defeats, the The 49ers have been plagued by injuries. In 2022's NFC Championship game, they lost both their starting quarterback Brock Purdy and their backup Josh Johnson during the game, forcing running back Christian McCaffrey to take snaps at quarterback in what became a doomed effort. And in 2024, injuries to McCaffrey, star receiver Brandon Ayuk, and offensive tackle Trent Williams derailed their season once again, leading to a 6-11 finish. Given their recent history, a return to contention in 2025 would not be surprising, but until their championship luck takes a turn for the better, their place on this list of misfortune is secured. But cheer up, 49ers fans, and take solace in your past dominance, where teams like the 1980s Miami Dolphins were victims of the dynasty in San Francisco. The Dolphins were a powerhouse in the 1970s, winning back-to-back Super Bowls and securing the only undefeated season of the entire Super Bowl era under head coach Don Shula. But when quarterback Bob Greasy retired before the 1981 season, it signaled a new phase for the franchise. Despite losing their longtime leader, the Dolphins remained contenders thanks to their Killer Bees defense, led by star defensive lineman Bob Baumhauer. Despite having the league's worst passing offense, they dominated the AFC in the strike-shortened 1982 season and reached the Super Bowl, before falling to the Washington Redskins. It was clear the Dolphins needed a jolt on offense to take the next step, and in 1983, the football gods answered their prayers, delivering Dan Marino with the 27th pick in the NFL draft. Marino became the new starter midway through his rookie season, leading Miami to 9 wins in 10 games and the AFC's number 2 seed, but their Super Bowl dreams ended early in a turnover-plagued divisional round loss to Seattle. The Dolphins really took off in 1984, with Marino shattering passing records on his way to the MVP, while leading Miami to a dominant 14-2 record and another appearance in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, the greatest 49ers team of the Joe Montana era stood in their way, a 15-1 juggernaut that crushed the Dolphins 38-16. In 1985, the Dolphins won their 4th straight division title, but their season ended with a 31-14 loss to New England in the AFC Championship game. They failed to make another serious Super Bowl push until the early 90s, but were overshadowed by the Buffalo Bills AFC dynasty, a team we may or may not be covering later. As for Marino, he retired as one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, achieving just about everything in his NFL career, except winning the big one. Shifting back to the hardwood, we have the Phoenix Suns of the early 1990s. Over a 6-year span from 1989 to 1995, the Suns averaged 56 wins per season. In the early part of this run, they assumed the role of plucky upstarts led by Tom Chambers, Kevin Johnson, and Dan Marley. The group had some notable postseason moments, including knocking the top-seeded Lakers out of the playoffs in 1990. But lacking a top-of-the-line superstar, the progress stalled with early round exits in 1991 and 1992. Then came the blockbuster move that changed everything in 1993. Enter Charles Barkley, acquired via trade, who instantly won the league MVP award and led Phoenix to the best record in the NBA and its first finals appearance since 1976. But standing in their way were Michael Jordan and the big bad Chicago Bulls, seeking their 3rd straight championship. The Suns put up a valiant effort, nearly forcing a Game 7 after facing a 3-1 deficit, but John Paxson's iconic three-pointer in Game 6 sealed their fate. Despite the loss, after Jordan's sudden retirement in 1993, the Suns looked poised to take over the NBA. Instead, Hakeem Olajuwon's Houston Rockets stood in their way. In their second-round matchup in 1994, the Suns won Games 1 and 2 on the road, but squandered the series in 7 games. In the 1995 rematch, they held a 3-1 series lead and home court advantage, only to collapse again, with Mario Elie kiss of death shot in Game 7 providing the dagger. The Rockets went on to win the NBA title both years, claiming what the Suns had believed was theirs for the taking. Ironically, Barkley would join the Rockets 2 seasons later for a final shot at a championship that never came. To this day, the Suns are still chasing their first title, and Charles Barkley remains one of the greatest players to never win a ring. a fact his Inside the NBA co-hosts never let him forget. Many of the teams we've covered today suffered over the course of a half-decade. What sets the San Jose Sharks apart is the sheer longevity of their anguish. 15 straight seasons of contention and no Stanley Cup to show for it. San Jose's peak arguably came during the first half of this run, averaging an elite 108 points per season from 2004 to 2011, and winning the President's Trophy in 2009 with the NHL's best record. Led by franchise cornerstones Patrick Marleau and Joe Thornton, the Sharks consistently advanced deep in the playoffs, making 3 conference finals appearances, but were unable to break through to the Cup finals. Perhaps their most crushing defeat came in that President's Trophy winning 2009 campaign when they were stunned in the first round by the Anaheim Ducks. Remarkably, the Sharks managed to reinvent themselves in the 2010s, integrating new stars like Brent Burns and Joe Pavelski to remain competitive. But while their personnel changed, the bitter disappointment remained. Rock bottom arrived in 2014 when they became the second team in NHL history to blow a 3-0 series lead, collapsing against the Los Angeles Kings, who twisted the knife further by going on to win the Stanley Cup. 2 years later came a breakthrough, with the Sharks finally making the Stanley Cup final, but they lost a hard-fought series to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Their championship window closed after a 5th conference finals appearance in 2019, this time losing to the eventual champion St. Louis Blues in 6 games. Since then, the Sharks have entered an extended rebuild, failing to post a single winning season in the 2020s. On paper, the Texas Rangers of the early 2010s weren't the most dominant team on this list. Over the 5-year span from 2009 to 2013, they averaged a solid but not elite 91 wins per season and missed the playoffs in both the first and last years of this stretch. But in between, they experienced what can only be described as a sandwich of misfortune. Of course, no team earns a spot on this list without a taste of greatness, and for the Rangers, making back-to-back World Series appearances was an incredible achievement. Their first trip in 2010 ended in a decisive defeat to the San Francisco Giants, but making their first World Series appearance in franchise history was a major step forward. The following year, they returned even stronger, pairing star free agent signing Adrian Beltre with reigning MVP Josh Hamilton. They rolled through the AL playoffs and found themselves back in the World Series, this time against the St. Louis Cardinals. And in Game 6, they stood on the brink of redemption, holding a 2-run lead in the bottom of the 9th, a single strike away from their first championship. As you can guess, this wasn't a happy ending. David Freese hit a game-tying triple off the right field wall to force extra innings. Then the Rangers found themselves 1 strike away yet again, only for Lance Berkman to deliver another game-saving hit. And Freese delivered the final blow in the 11th inning, launching a walk-off home run to send Cardinals fans into a frenzy. The Rangers never recovered, falling in Game 7 as the Cardinals completed one of the most stunning comebacks in World Series history. The following season, the Rangers built a commanding 13-game division lead over the Oakland A's, only to unravel in September, ceding the division on the final day of the season and losing to the Orioles in the 1-game wildcard. It would take another decade for the Rangers to finally capture their first World Series title, but for fans who endured this era, some wounds may never fully heal. Heading into the mid-1990s, the Cleveland Indians were a franchise stuck in irrelevance, having failed to post a winning season since 1986. But the 90s brought a resurgence led by the power-hitting duo of Albert Bell and Jim Thome, alongside the rise of young superstar Manny Ramirez. In 1994, they were squarely in contention to win the AL Central, trailing the White Sox by 1 game, but the season was cut short by a player strike. Cleveland came back with a vengeance in 1995, steamrolling to 100 wins despite a shortened 144-game season, and leading the majors in runs scored. In the playoffs, they made their first World Series appearance since 1954, but fell short against the Atlanta Braves in 6 games. Undeterred, Cleveland returned in 1996 as the best team in baseball, but this time their postseason run ended abruptly in the ALDS as the Baltimore Orioles stunned them in 4 games. Their most bitter pill would come in 1997. Despite a modest 86-75 record, the Indians captured the AL Central again and caught fire in October. They defeated the Yankees and Orioles to reach their second World Series in 3 years. And in Game 7 against the Marlins, they were on the cusp of ending their championship drought. Leading 2-1 in the bottom of the ninth, they handed the ball to their star closer, Jose Mesa, 3 outs away from immortality. But Mesa surrendered the tying run, and the Marlins won on a walk-off single in the 11th inning to win the championship. Despite the devastation, the Indians continued to press on. In 1999, they reloaded by acquiring superstar second baseman Roberto Alomar and surged to a 97-65 record, only to suffer another playoff collapse, blowing a 2-0 lead in the ALDS to the Boston Red Sox. More than 2 decades later, Cleveland is still chasing its first World Series title since 1948. The Utah Jazz simply picked the wrong decade to knock on the door of a championship. Throughout the 1990s, the Jazz were a model of consistency, averaging 56 wins per season. Their rise began even earlier in 1988, when the star duo of Karl Malone and John Stockton pushed the eventual champion Lakers to 7 games in the second round. By 1989, Stockton and Malone had become perennial All-NBA players, and the Jazz cemented themselves as mainstays near the top of the Western Conference. But their early playoff journeys were often cut short. In 1989, they were upset in the first round as the number 2 seed by the Run TMC Warriors. In 1990, despite a 55-win season, they suffered another first-round exit and then came back-to-back losses at the hands of Clyde Drexler's Portland Trailblazers. The tide began to shift in the mid-90s. The Jazz acquired sharpshooter Jeff Hornacek, forming a big three with Stockton and Malone. They began to make deeper runs in the playoffs, reaching the Western Conference Finals in 1994 and 1996. Then came a breakthrough in 1997. The Jazz dominated the regular season, finishing with a franchise-best 64-18 record and claiming the number 1 seed for the first time. They exercised past demons in the Western Conference Finals, finally toppling a Houston Rockets team that had long stood in their way, with Stockton's buzzer-beating three-pointer in Game 6, sending Utah to its first NBA Finals. But waiting for them was Michael Jordan, back from retirement and armed with a 69-win Bulls team. The series was a battle, but Jordan's heroics proved too much. A buzzer-beating shot in Game 1, and the legendary flu game performance in Game 5. The Bulls closed the series in 6 games, and Utah's championship dreams remained unfulfilled. Determined to finish the job, the Jazz stormed back in 1998, winning 62 games and securing home court advantage throughout the playoffs, making their way back to the NBA Finals for a rematch with Chicago, seeking to change their narrative in basketball history. In another tightly contested series, Utah found itself on the brink in Game 6, clinging to a 1-point lead with under a minute left. But Jordan ripped their hearts out again, delivering the game-winning jumper over Brian Russell to win the championship. The Jazz stayed in contention through the 2001 season, but their window slammed shut as Stockton and Malone aged out of their prime, completing one of the most successful runs in NBA history without a championship banner to show for it. It takes a special combination of success and misery to claim the top of these rankings, and only one franchise can claim 4 consecutive championship round defeats on its resume. From 1988 to 1993, the Buffalo Bills were a powerhouse. They averaged 12 wins per season, won the AFC East 5 times, and became the only team in NFL history to make the Super Bowl 4 years in a row. If you're 10 years old, you're probably assuming this is one of the greatest dynasties in NFL history. Instead, the Bills became the ultimate cautionary tale for sports heartbreak. The Bills' first Super Bowl appearance should have been their coronation. They dominated the regular season, finishing 13-3 with the best point differential in the league, the most touchdowns, and the Defensive Player of the Year in Bruce Smith. Fueled by their high-powered offense, led by future Hall of Famers Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, and Andre Reed, they entered the Super Bowl as 7-point favorites against the New York Giants. And down 1 point in the fourth quarter, the Bills were in position for a championship-winning 47-yard field goal. But kicker Scott Norwood infamously hooked it wide right. Looking to redeem themselves, Buffalo went 13-3 in 1991, but this time they ran into a buzzsaw in the Super Bowl, the 14-2 Washington Redskins, who jumped out to a 37-10 lead and cruised to the title. In 1992, the Bills ceded the AFC East to the Miami Dolphins, but made another impressive run and found themselves back in the Super Bowl. This time they faced a rising juggernaut in the Dallas Cowboys, led by Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin. If losing 2 straight Super Bowls was painful, losing 3 was unbearable. And this one wasn't even close. The Cowboys humiliated Buffalo 52-17, forcing 9 turnovers in one of the biggest blowouts in Super Bowl history. Somehow the Bills clawed back to the Super Bowl in 1993, setting up a rematch with Dallas. Despite entering as even larger underdogs, the Bills entered halftime leading 13-6. A disaster quickly struck in the second half. Thurman Thomas fumbled on the opening drive, and Dallas returned it for a touchdown. The Cowboys took control of the game from there, riding Emmitt Smith's dominant performance to a 30-13 win, sealing Buffalo's fate for a 4th straight year. The Bills made a few more playoff appearances in the mid-90s, but Jim Kelly retired in 1996, slamming their Super Bowl window shut. Creating a short list of teams today was a highly subjective task, so I wanted to close out by highlighting the teams that just missed the cut. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you next time.